Today we'll start the next sub-area of linguistics. We have covered the sounds, phonology, phonetics, phonology, sounds and sound systems of languages. Then we covered morphology, which is how words are built. Then we moved on to see how sentences and phrases are built out of words, and that was the area of syntax. Then last time we talked about semantics, and you have read upon semantics in your textbook, and you've viewed the links posted. So we have covered the 5 key areas of linguistics, and we are now moving on outside the sentence, because everything we've done so far has been inside the sentence, okay? And now we are moving to take the context of language into consideration, and that's an extremely important element for our interactions, because every time we are speaking, we speak in a particular context, and that context then is going to affect how we talk, how language is distributed in a particular situation. So pragmatics is the area of linguistics, sub-area of linguistics, that studies the contribution of context to meaning. It's the contribution of context to meaning. Because we rely on the context quite a bit when we interpret what is going on. When we talked about semantics, we talked about how words, we need to understand the meanings of words, but not only the meanings of words, but how those words are arranged in a particular sentence. So both word meaning and sentence meaning come into the interpretation of understanding what is going on, and that's semantics. But now in pragmatics we go outside language and use what is in that context in order to interpret what is going on. So, for instance, if I say to Joshua, hypothetically, if I say, Joshua, could you open the door? You would not just say, sure, I could, but I won't. You would most likely get up and go and close the door, okay? Or open, whichever. So it's in this particular context, if I say something to you as a student, it probably means that I want that to happen, right? And I'm not just asking Joshua's ability to open the door. So the context, especially since you are closest to the door, that goes partially to the interpretation. So pragmatics looks at the context and its contribution and how people use language within a context, and why they, let's add why they use language in particular ways in these contexts. Now there are different kinds of contexts that allow us to interpret what is going on, or allow us to determine how to talk to our interlocutors. So there's the physical context. Let's talk about that first. In this particular physical context, we are in Evans 105, the Ralph W. Pease Auditorium, and that means that what is going on language-wise is probably a lecture, and that means that particular context, this physical context here, it also determines that whoever is standing behind the microphone, behind this podium here, is going to be in charge of the lecture, right? And you are sitting on those red chairs, and that context determines your role in this particular physical situation, right? So your role is that of a student, and mine is that of your professor. And that determines the distribution of talk. So So if we were in a smaller classroom, in a different physical space, that would alter a little bit how we carry out this lecture. It would be more of a discussion kind of a thing. I would ask more questions and you would participate with your answers. But this particular physical space, it determines that this is going to be a lecture and I will be talking most of the time, right? With, you know, with an occasional question thrown here and there. So that's the physical context. And we can, you know, go on and imagine other kinds of physical contexts. If you run into me on the parking lot, that's another physical context, and I won't all of a sudden start lecturing to you in that particular physical context. We will most likely exchange some pleasantries like, hi, how are you doing? How's it going? And that sort of, so the distribution of talk in that particular context would probably be more equal in a way. If we run into each other at the local Walmart, that would be another physical context, and you can, you know, come up like, you know, with an endless number of different physical contexts which alter how people talk to each other, even though they may be the same people. So it still alters the way. And let's then move on to look at the social context. So social context it basically means that everybody who engages in a conversation with another person brings the social roles that we have into that situation. I already mentioned this lecture. I bring my social role. Once I position myself here, that means that I have to activate my social role of a professor here. And once you take your seats there, you have to activate your social roles as students in this class. But all of us have a multiple set of different social roles. When you go home, you become roommates or children of your parents or siblings of your brothers and sisters. When you meet your grandparents, you activate the social role of a grandchild. And when you go out with your friends, then you activate your social role as a friend, not as a student. So we all have these multiple social roles. And that determines, to an extent, how we speak, right? So you would speak differently to your grandparents in your role as a grandchild. You will speak differently to your mother, to your father, to your sister, your brother, your cousin, your friend, and that all depends on the social role that you have. I don't speak like this when I go home and talk with my husband. So even though sometimes he says, don't use your lecture voice with me. So I'm reminded that, okay, I'm home, I'm not lecturing to him. So I shouldn't. So these different social roles, and you get activated, and it kind of is an interplay with the physical situation, but the social roles are important determinants of how we speak to each other. Then there's the epistemic context, which is basically, it basically means that we bring into the speech situation the knowledge of what we know about our interlocutors and how much they know about what we are talking about, what they know about the world, basically. So if you have a speech situation where, you know, somebody calls you, one of the people who aren't here right now calls you and says, so what did she talk about today? That could be an ambiguous question said by somebody else other than your classmate here. But if Franco, for instance, calls Michael and says, "What did she talk about today?" You would immediately know that she refers to me, right? And what requires the answer of pragmatics. She talked about pragmatics. So we bring the knowledge of what we know the other people know. But if you're, let's take your grandmother for instance, if your grandmother is not a linguist and asks, so what did you learn in school today? You wouldn't probably say, I learned about pragmatics. You would probably say, we talked about how context influences how we speak. Because if your grandmother is not a linguist, then it's not a given that she would know what pragmatics means, right? So we kind of like gauge always, what does this person know about the world? If you talk to a 3-year-old, you don't talk the same way because you know that a 3-year-old doesn't necessarily know all the things that a 30-year-old person would know. So epistemic context also matters. We know what our interlocutors know, and we adjust our language to that level. So for a 3-year-old, you would be choosing different kinds of words, right? Then there is the linguistic context. That's the fourth kind of a context that also determines what goes on in a speech situation. And a simple example would be like if I say, "How are you?" It's pretty much predictable what you're going to be saying. You will say something like, "What? I'm fine, thank you, how are you?" So there's just a limited number of acceptable replies to "Hi, how are you?" And that "how are you," it provides a linguistic context of what's going to follow. So it requires a reply. If I say, "Hi, how are you?" If you don't reply to it, it would be odd, right? So it requires some kind of a reply. And questions, typically, a question is a linguistic context for an answer, and those kinds of little exchanges, they are called adjacency pairs, because they are adjacent to each other. A question requires an answer, a greeting requires a reply, and so on. So that's the linguistic context. Also, we can look at the linguistic context at a more detailed level. If I say, "Once upon a time," that provides the linguistic context of what's going to follow. What is going to follow if I start, "Once upon a time"? What is that?
A fairy tale.
Yeah, it's the beginning of a fairy tale, and you pretty much know what the next word is. Once upon a time. There was, yes. And then you provide what was. Like, once upon a time there was a little girl whose name was Little Red Riding Hood. Okay. And then in the next sentence, I continue with the fairy tale and I refer to the girl. I don't constantly repeat the Little Red Riding Hood, Little Red Riding Hood, Little Red Riding Hood did this and that. What do I use in order to refer to the Little Red Riding Hood? Yeah, like she. So I wouldn't constantly use the full noun phrase, but I would switch to she. She went to see her grandmother. So using pronouns means that there has been some linguistic context that those pronouns refer to as their antecedents, right? So a linguistic context means all those kinds of things that determine what follows linguistically. So those are the four different kinds of contexts that always somehow enter into the speech situation and to an extent determine how we speak. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about conversation, how conversation happens. That is an area that goes under pragmatics. So when we have a conversation, it means that somebody is talking. And the person who is talking is the person who takes the conversational floor by starting to talk. And talking is a really powerful way of controlling what goes on in a linguistic situation. The one who speaks is holding the conversational floor and is also deciding the topics. For instance, if I'm talking, I can, if I'm giving a lecture, I can pretty much decide what I'm going to talk about once I hold on to what we have stated in the syllabus. When I'm ready to give up my conversational floor, my space on the conversational floor, what do I do in order to give you the floor?
Like ask questions?
Yes, what I just did. So I gave the conversational floor to one of you and you took the conversational floor by answering the question. But I'm still kind of determining what the topic is because I'm not just gonna ask whatever comes to my mind. It somehow has to be coherent with what is going on during that speech situation. So we think that, we've been talking about the rules of language. Most pronouncedly, we talked about the rules of language when we were going through the syntax files. And in syntax, the rules are very strict. A sentence consists of a noun phrase and a verb phrase. A noun phrase must have a noun. It can have a determiner. It can have an adjective or many adjectives. It can be followed. The noun can be followed by a prepositional phrase or even a clause, like in the case of a relative clause. So those rules are relatively strict, and we're used to understanding, kind of like acknowledging that, there are grammatical sentences, there are ungrammatical sentences, and ungrammatical sentences would be something that, doesn't follow the rules of English, the phrase structure rules of English syntax. But we don't usually think about the fact that conversation also has rules. That what we just did, I'm holding the conversational floor by talking, and I relinquish that conversational floor by asking a question. But that's not the only rule of conversation. There are unwritten rules. Yes, I'm violating one of the conversational rules. I'm not supposed to just go silent in the middle of the lecture. I can stop for a little while to kind of like collect my thoughts and collect my papers, but I am not supposed to be stopping talking for too long. It becomes kind of, awkward, right? So that's one of the social rules of conversation. And there are also other kinds of rules. For instance, the idea that when we are talking, we are not supposed to be all talking at the same time, unless it's a presidential debate like the first one. three people were talking at the same time, and we know then that something's wrong here. People are disagreeing if they talk at the same time. So interruption or overlapping talk is actually the neutral way of referring to what's going on when people are talking at the same time, and it's not always negative. It often is a sign that something's not right in the conversation. People are disagreeing. They may be angry with each other if they are talking at the same time, but there may be overlapping talk also when it's not a negative thing. Like for instance, and that is called then back channeling. We all do this like, yeah, you're right. We do these kinds of things, and those kinds of comments and go with the head nods, and you look into the eyes of the interlocutor, and that's overlapping talk also very often. But it's not a negative thing always. Overlapping talk is not a negative thing always. If we are just back channeling, it means and it sends the message to the interlocutor that I'm listening to you, I agree with you, I encourage you to go on and talk. I'm not necessarily wanting to take the conversational floor by just doing back channeling, like So back channeling is not necessarily the same as interrupting. Of course, then there is interruption when somebody wants to take the conversational floor, and these kinds of conversational rules may sometimes differ based on the culture. So in some cultures, for instance, the back channeling is not necessarily done with yeah, right on. It may be done in a different way, like just, you're looking at the person, you may be nodding your head. I had some funny experiences with back channeling because in my culture, in Finland, when I was growing up, we did not do this verbal. We did not do much of the verbal back channeling, like, yeah. We do more of the, like, you're looking at a person, that means that you're listening. So the back channeling was not so audible. So I moved to the United States, and I speak with my friend on the phone, and my friend is talking, and I am listening, paying attention, but I'm not doing the kind of a back channeling. And so she stops and she says, are you listening? Are you there? Are you listening? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm here. And it's just that she couldn't see that I am paying attention because I didn't make any verbalization. So there may be, things may have changed in Finland ever, since I left. But that was an interesting observation that I made, that I need to learn to do this verbal back channeling. In some cultures, silence is valued more than in some other cultures, and that also then kind of feeds into the unwritten rules of conversation that people have. Okay, and that may kind of like, enter into, if the conversational rules of a particular culture differ from our conversational rules, we tend to think that these people are rude, they are odd, or what have you, and we don't necessarily realize that it may be because their conversational rules are different. So we'll come back to talk about the conversational rules when we go over Grice's maxims, and that is H.P. Grice's attempt to kind of like pin down what the conversational rules are. But before we go there, let's talk a little bit about positive and negative politeness. The rules of conversation, they also show these different kinds of ways of being polite. Let me ask you this: if you here in the Evans building, if you take the elevator and there's somebody else in that elevator, do you say something to that person or not? Most of the time, if you don't know that person. No? Anyone who would say something? Like some small talk, like, oh, parking was so bad. Oh, the weather is so nice. Or something, oh, this elevator is so slow, or whatever. Those are kind of like safe topics to talk about even with a stranger, but you wouldn't necessarily say anything. And that falls within the limits of being polite, because in that particular physical context, if you don't know a person, so that brings the social context, it gives the license for not saying anything. But what about this? If you are here and outside the lecture room, somebody who is also in this class is sitting there and is crying and crying and crying. And you know that, this person is in the same class as I am, but you don't know that person that very well. What would you do? Which of you would just ignore it, like, oh, I don't want to go there? Or which of you would go and say something like, would you say something? Yeah, are you okay? Something neutral, kind of like yes. Joshua, would you say something, or would you just like?
I think at that point they don't want to be bothered, so I would just like to say.
Well, people in that kind of a situation, people do kind of divide into two groups. They divide to based on politeness, because you do want to be polite to everybody, right? So based on what you do, you show either positive politeness or negative politeness. And if you go to that person and show that you're taking an active interest in what's going on, you're offering help or asking some comforting questions, you are showing positive politeness. Negative politeness is not a negative thing at all, but it's also politeness, but it's a different kind of politeness. It's like, I want to be left alone, I want to leave you alone, I treat the other person the same way you would like to be treated, basically, and give a person space. So positive politeness, if you are like, these are not either or things, and again, situations, physical contexts, epistemic contexts, even linguistic contexts, they determine, are we going to be more positively or more negatively polite, but we will be polite. Negative politeness is also politeness. But positive politeness means that you take an active interest in a person and show that you care by some overt actions, like asking, can I do something for you? Negative politeness is that you give a person space. So different kinds of things, and different cultures, again, they favor either positive or negative politeness. It often goes together with how much silence is tolerated in a culture. In the Anglo-American culture, silence is not tolerated that much as in perhaps some other cultures. There are all these jokes about my native culture that, and some of these jokes are definitely true. You may be on the bus stop, and you're standing on the bus stop every single morning, taking the bus to work with somebody else who is also on that bus stop, and you know that that person is always here. And for years, you may just be standing there and not say anything. And that's acceptable as negative politeness in that culture, because leaving a person alone, not intruding, not entering the person's space or what have you. So whereas here in that kind of a situation, people tend to be more positively polite, that they say something like, "Oh, it's such a wonderful day today," and or "I hate this rain," or whatever, something which is called phatic communion. It's a term that Malinowski came up with, and it refers to this basically meaningless talk about the weather, about the parking, about the traffic, or what have you, and so those safe topics that we can engage in. But they still, that talk still has a function. It's not like totally meaningless socially, because it adheres to the politeness patterns of a particular culture and makes everybody kind of like feel good. So it's kind of expected in certain situations. I think this morning I have become so Americanized that when Joshua came here, I said, "Hi, how are you doing?" And that's just because it feels it feels the silence in a way, and it makes us both feel that the relationship is polite. So yeah, so we do those kinds of things. Pay attention to how you behave in certain situations. Okay, so let's move on to talk about what we do when we do conversation. Now we have, and this is an important distinction, we have basically only 3 different kinds of sentence types that we use in order to take care of all the communicative needs that we need to take care of during our lifetimes. Only 3 different kinds of sentences. And here I've written down the examples of what these sentence types are. Take this down. Okay, so today's Wednesday is one kind of a sentence type, which gives information, makes a comment, a statement about the world. What kind of a sentence is this? What is the sentence type? We have 3 different kinds of sentences: declarative, interrogative, and imperative. And those 3 sentence types will cover everything we need to cover in our lives. So today's Wednesday is declarative, interrogative, or imperative. That would be a declarative sentence. So we have the declarative sentence type, okay? And most typically the declarative sentences, they make a statement or an assertion about the world. And that is a very important communicative function. We need to make statements about the state of the world every day, right? So that was the declarative sentence, and today's Wednesday, most basically, it makes a statement. Then, if you do not know what day it is today, you have a couple of ways of finding out from your interlocutor. You can say, "Is today Wednesday?" Or you can, so that would be a yes/no question. Is today Wednesday is a yes/no question. Or you can say what day is it today, and here we have a so-called WH question. So both of these two different kinds of question types, they are in the form not of a declarative sentence, but in the form of an interrogative sentence. Interrogative meaning you interrogate someone, not in the sense like, you know, in an interrogation at the police station, but we use interrogative sentences in order to find out what is going on in the world, in order to find out an answer to a question. And interrogative sentences, they are used as questions. So these here are sentence functions. The function of the declarative sentence most basically is to make an assertion. The function of the interrogative sentence is to ask a question. Okay. And then we have the third kind of a sentence type, which is called imperative sentence. And imperative sentences, they are used to give commands and make requests. Order, give orders, order, command, request. That's their basic function. Check your calendar. I'm telling you to check your calendar. So the imperative sentence is used for that. All these three different sentence types, declarative, interrogative, and imperative, they show a particular kind of a syntactic form. And the interrogative sentences, for instance, they show a conversion, like here, today is Wednesday becomes is today Wednesday. So is has been moved there. If it's a WH question, it has the WH element, the question word, in the beginning of the sentence, and then, you know, you do certain other things depending on what kind of a WH question you have. But the syntax shows that this is an interrogative sentence. It has a particular kind of a syntactic transformation, so to say, that has happened, and it's been derived. Like, for instance, today's Wednesday becomes a yes, no question by this inversion of today and is. So the syntax shows what sentence type it is. And check your calendar. The imperative sentence also shows what type of sentence we're talking about. Does this check your calendar? What is it syntactically? What is it missing here from the beginning? Every sentence must have a subject noun phrase and a verb phrase, and here we are missing the subject here from the beginning, the subject NP. What is the understood subject here? Yes, exactly. You check your calendar, but we don't typically say that. We leave that, we delete that you. That's a kind of a transformation as well, the imperative sentence transformation. So you check your calendar becomes check your calendar. Again, the syntax is showing that we have the imperative sentence type. And the purpose, the function of the imperative sentences is to order, give an order, or make a request. Like, open your books is a request in the form of an imperative sentence. So, this brings to us, kind of indirectly, to the point of an important point of pragmatics, which is politeness. And and it also brings us to directness versus indirectness. direct. So speech acts, these would be sentence functions, and they can also be called speech acts. Because when we talk, talking is an action, and we do things by talking. So if I say today is Wednesday, I'm doing something with that particular statement. I'm making a statement. I'm making a claim, an assertion about what day it is today. If I say, what day is it today? That is also doing something. I am launching, giving the linguistic context of a question by the interrogative sentence, which means that it needs to be followed with an answer, either confirming that it's Wednesday or it's not. So in order to find out about affairs, states of affairs in the world, we have been, so to say, we've been giving interrogative sentences so that we can find out, so that we can ask questions. We can perform this kind of a speech act that then allows us to find out about the world. And the imperative sentences have been, quote unquote, given to us so that we can boss other people around. We can influence our fellow humans by telling them what to do. Typically, something that we want to happen. So when a declarative sentence is really making a statement or making an assertion, we have a direct speech act if there's a match between the declarative sentence type and its form, its function. So a direct speech act is when a declarative sentence is intended to make a statement. When an interrogative sentence is intended to find out about the state of affairs in the world, it would be a direct speech act. And when an imperative sentence is used to order someone around, to give a command, to make a request, then it's a direct speech act. But you can probably already thinking about this. We are not direct all the time because there are also indirect speech acts. And indirect speech acts can be defined relatively simply so that there is a mismatch between the sentence type and its function, its intention. Let's think about a simple situation where you are at home and the trash can is completely full and you don't want to take it out, you have something else to do. You want the person you're living with, your friend, your roommate, your younger sibling to take it out. What do you say about the trash? Take it out. You can be direct and you can say, take out the trash. That would be a direct speech act, no ambiguity there. But if you are really, really busy turning in your homework via Blackboard and you can't just, stop it, and you say to your mother, would you tell your mother, take the trash out, Mom? Or how would you word it?
Something like, the trash is really full.
The trash is really full, Mom. It's starting to smell, and that would be a declarative sentence, but if your intention is that Mom, take it out because you just simply can't do it and the trash day is tomorrow, that would be an indirect speech act. You can use a declarative sentence to give a command, The trash is really full. The trash needs to be taken out. That is on the surface level, it's a statement, but it's not intended as a statement. It's intended as an order command. Hint, hint, right? And that would be an indirect speech act. Could you use the interrogative sentence type for if you want the trash to be taken out by somebody else than you, could you use the interrogative sentence type? Pretend to ask a question, but you're not really asking a question. You want the trash out, so what would you say?
Will you take out the trash?
Yeah, could you take out the trash? Will you take out the trash? Do you have time to take out the trash? So we're pretending to ask a question, but that's not our intention. Our intention is to give a command, make an order, make a request, but we are being indirect. So we could, yes, also use the interrogative sentence type in order to give a command. Now, I want you to listen to yourselves, and when you, especially when you want someone to do something, how do you word it? If we are in a really comfortable situation with somebody else, we can be more direct, but very often we are avoiding being direct because that comes down back to the politeness thing, that we want to be polite. Okay, so we can be direct by having a match between the sentence type and the sentence function. We can also be direct if we use a verb that is called a performative verb. Like, for instance, I declare that today is Wednesday. The word declare means that it is also a direct speech act. It's the use of a performative verb. I ask you if today is Wednesday. The verb ask would be a performative verb that also makes the speech act direct, because I'm like open. I'm openly saying what speech act I'm doing. Or I order you to take the trash out. I request you to take the trash out. That would also be a direct speech act, even though when we use a performative verb, those are always, the sentences are always in the form of a declarative sentence. Because I ask you, I order you, I request you. And they have the first person singular as the subject position. Okay, so really briefly, running out of time, much to say about pragmatics. If I could have you for 3 days a week, we could do this a little bit more slowly. But this is all in your book. So read about Grice's conversational maxims. This is Grice's conversational principle, which is H.B. Grice's, those are his years a philosopher, and his purpose was to kind of try to make sense about what people do when they engage in conversations. Because we know that there are these unwritten rules of conversation that everybody pretty much follows. And these are the maxims, he called them his maxims, Grice's maxims. Maxim of quality, basically don't lie. And don't say something that you're not sure about. If somebody asks me, what time is it? You kind of trust me that I will tell the truth, okay? And that's in most conversations. Of course, people lie all the time, left and right. However, in most conversations, we trust our interlocutors to tell the truth. Maxim of quantity means that we should be talking the appropriate amount of contributing the appropriate amount of information. Like, you know, if you ask me, or if you say to me, how are you? I cannot say, oh, I really had a bad day and I am so behind in everything I'm doing and the laundry is not done and the blah, blah, blah. I go on and on. That's violating the maxim of quantity. Maxim of relevance means that our conversational contributions are relevant to what's going on. So here, in order to be relevant, we need to be discussing pragmatics because that's on the syllabus for today. Maxim of manner means that we have to be clear, unambiguous, and logical, present the things in a logical order. But read about these. Your book gives a lot of good examples, and thanks for your attention, and you have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.